And now we're talking about chapter 43, the whole truth and nothing but. Telling the plain unvarnished truth about yourself and coming abruptly out of a personal denial ain't exactly fun, and it always hurts. But again, it always makes you feel better later. There are no exceptions to this concept, so I truly needed to face this story again. And since I buried most of it in denial long ago. After about a week of a fantastically torrid, passionate, and secret love affair, Peter came back from his bush tour exhausted and arrived at Jenny's in his Volkswagen bus, just like one of the U.S. hippies drive when they leave their parents and pretend to be fiercely independent. I was so embarrassed by my unacceptable behavior, and I was feeling so guilty I could not bear to go near either of them. I can't lie anymore, and I knew it would show on my face, or at least on my body language if I did. They had lived as a couple for 2 years, and had a very strange platonic on-again, off-again, loving, but sometimes not loving, sexual relationship, depending totally on Jenny's moods. Apparently, she kept the secret about our affair, and I was invited to come to dinner on the weekend. I believe it was a Saturday night. We all pretended to be happy foreign expat African adventurers joking around during dinner. Suddenly, Jenny turned deadly serious, turned, facing Peter, and told him directly into his unsuspecting face that she had fell in love with me while he was gone. I stood up abruptly. You guys have a lot of things to talk about. I'm getting out of here. And I split. I left. I walked all the way back to Veneta, talking to myself directly into my own face like a salty old United States Marine Sergeant Major to a raw-ass recruit. I was home in about an hour. All of a sudden, knock, knock. I opened the door. Peter gave me the biggest hug I ever got from a man, and he explained, "You're the new man in the house." I stood open-mouthed, hesitating. What does that mean? He told me the relationship between them was totally over. It was over a long time ago. It was just a catalyst that caused it to come to the surface. I felt better, but I still felt guilty. He said affectionately, "Come on, old man, let's finish dessert." Grabbed me by the arm and escorted me back to his VW bus. I arrived sheepishly in the dark garden. Jenny was waiting in the full romance of moonlight and approached me with a real passionate kiss. I turned scarlet, the appropriate color for me at that exact moment. Peter applauded, and the three of us hugged for a very long time. Stunning both of us, she suddenly announced, sticking out her hand to Peter, "Give me my keys." She wanted his house keys. She took them rudely out of his hand, grabbed my hand, and plopped them into it. I stood there with my mouth open. I was the new man in the house. So that's how things are done in the expat world of Africa. I was truly stunned. Now where would Peter sleep? Both glanced as if that was not a big problem. After all, he had the bus parked right inside the garden gate, right in the driveway. He took a shower, I took a bath, and we all went to bed. And that was the end of that. So I thought. As a note, this part of the story, this next part, is often debated, long after it was all over. Peter never calculated the loss of middle-class perks on his recently acquired middle-class living style, forged deeply into his psychic process, and the old sleeping in the bus trick wasn't as comfortable to sound. But it didn't last long. I was not inclined to live in the shadow of Jenny's former paramour and his contrived and continued presence in the same house. But I kept my mouth shut, and I kept that part of me under control. Eventually, after a few days of what I would call a really good try, a joking kinda slapping around started between the two of them, and suddenly turned into a serious, vicious, raging argument. They punched, they kicked, and they screamed at each other. I sat totally still in the living room, completely out of reach, surprised at the venom they both had, and I watched the whole deal. It was a sight to behold. and she told him where to stuff his VW bus and demanded he leave the property that very night. I was appalled at the heat the argument generated as they exposed their repressed hate for each other. I was a wreck. Now I got him thrown out of his life. I was disgusted with myself. I left and I walked back home to Veneta. I did not sign up for this drama bullshit in relationships. Hell, that's the reason I left America in the first place. I was tired as hell of phony middle-class dramatics. Jenny came out the next day to get me, and I gratefully accepted a ride back to her home. Jenny and I really were in love for a time, and I couldn't get enough of each other. Then, as it always does with arguments, when there's nothing committed in writing, the whole thing turns sour. I'm not a person that adopts new rules or commandments for my life. Being an alcoholic and performing all the screw-ups in my life taught me one thing for absolute certain. Nothing is permanent. I stay loose, and I keep my sleeping bag handy and my dop kit close by. We were intense lovers for 3 months and lasted 9 more as untrustworthy, arrogant, and jealous friends. Peter settled his VW bus issue, and he took it out to a shady tourist area way out in the desert moonscape and started painting furiously, coming into town about every 2 weeks for provisions, but pretty much out of the psychodrama. One evening, after a year together, as I was kissing her politely goodnight, she and I both started laughing hysterically at each other at that exact moment in a very long, cathartic, laughing experience. I blurted out, "You want me to leave, don't you?" And she laughed even harder and said, "Oh my God, yes." I moved out the next morning into a little 2-room tiny cottage in her back garden. We, all 3 of us, spent another year together in and out of each other's lives as really good buddies. And then along came Hein with my new African living plan. One fine night, Hein came to the garden gate, looked over the gate and yelled, "Ah, Tommy Sensei!" This was his usual routine for many months for our regular, exhausting 2-hour practice sessions 3 nights a week in judo. I was always waiting, dressed in my hand-laundered, fresh-smelling, clean white judo gi, and I would yell back, "Okay, just a minute," and then I would pass by all the open windows and doors, wrapped in my worn-out old black belt around my tired old waist as I walked by her open window. "See you later, Jenny," and she'd wave back. Hein wore me out. He was ready for my plan for Olympic judo and brought many other ex-military types waiting in the wings for an old U.S. Marine to provide military-type leadership and enthusiasm for a cause way beyond their currently frustrated and politically unstable lives. South Africa had just disappeared. These were all military people. Their entire career disappeared in 24 hours. All their records disappeared in 24 hours. And then the Truth Commission was established so that everybody could be declared innocent. The end of apartheid caused much hurt and much harm, as well as good in Namibia and South Africa. Archbishop Tutu's brilliant move of insisting on establishing a Truth Commission around these parts was the only political shelter they ever had for their post-war lifestyles. The ability for Afrikaners to make a living and look for work opportunities, as well as the colored and the blacks from the losing side, was dim at best. No one talked about it. It was just there. I grabbed on to their deep-seated psychic need, and without any real effort whatsoever, except to never talk about it, I turned these fanatic, ex-patriot, ex-military screwballs into judo fanatics. They were enthusiastic. They trained very hard. They were always begging for more. Hein was here tonight at the gate with more news about more judo. "Ah, Sensei, we can go to the All-African Games next year." I said, "Hell yes," I announced. And now I could get really fierce in the training sessions. Hein asked if I'd be interested in moving from Jenny's cottage into an empty garage in the back of his house in Veneta for the same rent I was paying for Jenny, and we could train together every day. He was at the other end of town near our dojo. It was exactly the break Jenny was looking for from my stubborn independence. I even ordered meat in the public restaurants. It was a mortal sin if committed in public against a total freak called a veggie. That act alone always pissed her off for at least a week. I jumped at the opportunity for personal freedom again. I moved out the next day. We both were very relieved at the end of the whole matter. I believed our persistent and consistent raw honesty with each other is the only reason we are still close friends today. I kept friends with Jenny for a long time. I understand she's back in England now. First we agreed on officers at the judo group, and then we wrote a National Namibia Judo Association Constitution. I agreed to serve as the first president and national sensei. I was given a lifetime title of Shihan. Shihan is a Japanese word that means founder or father. And I was given the official award of 7th degree black belt for the specific purpose of political parity with all the other African nations, and as a new international activity for the Namibian National Sports Council. In other words, I got a promotion because of pure politics. That's what that paragraph says. I accepted gratefully, and because I knew I was already a 3rd or 4th degree anyway in America. Anyway, according to my own sensei, Dick Hugh, back in the States, he said, Tommy, you're at least an 8th degree. He knew I cared less about rank. I always depended on personal fighting skills for my judo reputation. He recommended I become an 8th degree, justified by my unique desire to get a brand new third world nation into the Olympic judo competition. He insisted that I was the sole sponsor of the effort. I paid for the privilege with my own blood and my own treasure, and that I told him I was very happy to just be the 7th. We established a bank account. I put in a bunch of my own money. I had been given a gift from America. Hein raised the rent from business friends of his to pay for the trip. Hein raised the rest from business friends to pay for his trip. We trained as fanatics for the rest of the year. Nick Colby, the guy I told you about earlier, my German friend, lined up the vehicles for transportation from Windhoek, from car dealers. He was injured in training and decided not to make the trip and take up a valuable seat. I trained the entire team as if we were going to fight in the next Olympic Games. Actually, I've never told this till this exact moment. I have to tell you something that I have never told a soul. I actually went to Namibia knowing full well they would never be trained well enough to fight in the Olympics, and that I might be the one that had to represent the country. So I had to stay in shape. And I was sweating it out that I just might have to do that. Okay, I trained the entire team as if they were going to fight. 11 of them had to have black belt certification and international tournament competence. And the next part of the story makes me look like the guy in The Karate Kid.